Lord Ramchandra, of course, appeared with his brothers, Lakshman, Bharat, Shatrugna. And, of course, they were actually part of this eternal entourage. And what we're talking about right now is Krishna's bed, Lord Vishnu's bed, which is Lakshman. And then also the chakra and the conch shell. It's interesting, isn't it? Like in the spiritual world, everything is conscious. Like every morning we blow conch shell, but it's not conscious. I don't think it's conscious. I hope it's not conscious. And in our Rathayatra card we had a chakra. I don't know if it's conscious. But anyway, maybe Sudarshan chakra was present, his energy was present there. Who knows? But in any case, all of Lord Ramchandra's associates, even Dasarath, and of course Kaikeyi, even Kaikeyi. Oops, let me put it on silence. It's on do not disturb, it still disturbs. So, even, what to speak of Kaikeyi and Manthara, they're all associates of the Lord who come with him to help him with his pastimes, right? So it's just amazing. So anyway, so getting back to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I was just thinking about that with Lord Ramchandra. Since I'm doing actually a comprehensive study of Lord Ramchandra's pastimes of separation. I have a whole class I'm preparing for Ramnami. I won't be here for Ramnami, don't worry. But I have a whole class I'm preparing for Ramnami, which I'm actually going to be in New Zealand, in Auckland, giving a class of Ramnami there. But just talking about practically every step of Lord Ramchandra's pastimes had a significant element of separation in them. Amazing. So much separation, intensity. And you could almost say the Ramayana was a tragedy. It's blissful. At the same time, there's this tragedy. You have the separation. Just to give you a few examples, just like you have Sita, entering the earth at the end, and Ram having to rule the earth, according to the Valmiki Ramayana, for 60,000 years. And Lava and Kush having to experience an extreme separation from their mother. And the mother left them when they were little kids for 60,000 years. And then Ram at the end banishing Lakshman, and having Lakshman enter the Sarayaryu, and then Ram entering, and poor Hanuman left alone. Of course, he had Vibhishan there. But, just like, oh my God. Anyway, this is my mind, on my mind, now the mind. So anyway, it is Srivasa. But even Srivasa Thakur was experiencing separation from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. For example, Srivasa Thakur, he left Navadvip after Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu left Navadvip, because Srivasa Thakur had this place in Navadvip, and also in Kumarhata too. Kumarhata was his actual home place or birthplace. And he had this place in Navadvip called the Srivasanda, obviously, I believe the Srivasa's place. Mm-hmm. And during Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's early pastimes, that's where they had the kirtans in Srivasanda. And these kirtans were just for pure devotees. There was no one else allowed. They would actually have a doorkeeper, I guess, or something, like Jai and Vijay. And they would check everyone's ID to see if they were, I don't know what sort of pure devotee test they gave. But anyway, and so for years, when Lord Chaitanya was exhibiting his Navadvip pastimes, maybe a little water or something on it.
There's a water.
For years, what?
One right there next to.
Oh, there's water there.
Right there.
Oh, nice glass. So, this is like India.
Haribo.
That's how you drink it. So anyway, so for years, what you've done was exhibiting his kirtan, ecstatic kirtan pastimes, and then separation, he leaves Navadvip, goes to Jagannath-puri, and then Srivasa Thakur didn't want to go stay in Navadvip. He just moved back to his ancestral place. And from time to time, he would come to see Mother Sachi. But otherwise, he wasn't interested in Navadvip anymore. It was just too painful for him to go to Navadvip. Even though every year he would go to see Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Jagannath-puri. So many things happened. Let's get away from separation for a second. Keep it more positive. So many things happened at this Srivas Angam of Lord Chaitanya Srivas Thakur during the kirtans. As I mentioned before, only pure devotees were present or allowed to come, but sometimes impure persons snuck in. And Srivas Thakur even had to do with someone who most of you may have trouble with, which is your mother-in-law. Anyway, I won't mention anything about it. So his mother-in-law wanted to go to the kirtan. And so she snuck in and she hid behind the drapes. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was having his kirtan. And what happened? He couldn't experience any ecstasy. Which is actually interesting, because when a devotee, Lord Chaitanya was showing us the importance of taking good association and at the same time a satsanga changa Vaishnava achar. That the behavior of Vaishnava is to avoid bad association. Sometimes people ask, why is this? Why are you people so fanatic? But because there's subtle energy in this world. And we're talking spiritual energy or even anti-spiritual energy. And there's also the three modes of nature, which are subtle. And even Krishna says in the Gita, Karanam Guna Sangasya Savasa Jagma Jonyashu, that the reason we're entangled is because of Guna Sangha. So, when we associate with Guna, how do we associate with the Gunas? We may eat food that's cooked by people with specific mentality and particular mode of nature, or food by people who are against God or Krishna, and it affects the consciousness. Or he may hear things. You can associate through any of the senses, and also there's sort of a subtle association or an atmosphere. Like any of you experience, like if you go to a holy place, you can actually feel the difference in the atmosphere. It's not the same. Even if you don't talk to anyone or hear anything before you take prasadam, there's like that. You can feel it. You go walk into Nugaloka temple. In the temple, wow, I feel peaceful. I mean, sometimes we even have people who are not devotees that come to the temple just to experience the peace. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was picking up on this lady's energy. And she wasn't inimical to Krishna consciousness, but she wasn't exactly qualified. She didn't have the adhikar to be there. Because Lord Chaitanya's kirtans, let me just clarify this. It's not that you have to be a pure devotee to hear the holy names. But Lord Chaitanya's kirtans were chanting Hare Krishna, yes, but they were having Leela kirtans too. Now, Leela kirtans means when you're dealing with the intimate descriptions of Radha and Krishna's loving exchanges. And so, in order to enter into those intimate discussions of Radha and Krishna's loving exchanges, such as we find in Ujjvala Nilamani and Vidagdhamani or Litamani, many of these other literatures, then you have to have the adhikar. In other words, you have to be ready, because if you don't have the adhikar, you will do something called projection. You project your own materialistic mentality upon those passages. You'll think when Radha and Krishna are kissing, well, it's just like, me kissing. When I kiss my dog. People in the West kiss their dogs. Anyway, my brother did. So, you'll think it's just like that. Or when you hear about Krishna eating, you're going to think, oh, Krishna's eating just like me. Or Krishna playing, is completely different because these loving exchanges between Krishna and his devotees are loving exchanges. People are not thinking of their own pleasure. You know, when you're watching a cricket game, you're not thinking about the pleasure of the cricket players, are you? You're thinking of your own hormones. You know, the rush you get, you know, isn't it exciting? And you sort of emphasize with them, you know, the players. I watch people watch cricket games before, and it's just like they're enjoying themselves on the bodily platform. Oh, hit! You see their muscles tense up and everything like that. So anyway, getting to the point, we actually think when we hear about Krishna's pastimes that it's just like when I was doing those things. You know, Krishna playing ball, or Krishna's friends playing monkey in the middle. You know what monkey in the middle is? You play that in India sometimes. You know, one boy takes his lunch, someone's lunch, and throws it to the third, and says, "Oh, where's my lunch?" And Krishna used to do that with his friends. And so it's not like that. If they're all doing everything to please Krishna, just like right now in the Bhagavatam, we just read how Rukmini got angry with Krishna. Now, you think, oh, I get angry with my wife too, or my husband. So she's just like me. No! Her anger is because she wants to please Krishna with her anger, right? Not because she's enjoying her anger or whatever, experiencing her anger. So that's why people were kept out. So anyway, so getting back to the mother-in-law. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not experiencing any ecstasy. And he said, what? So it must be here. It doesn't belong here. Like that's an envious person. And so with these intimate pastimes going on. And so they looked around, opened up the curtains, and there was this little old lady there. You know, kick her out. So the Srivasa Thakura had her kicked out. Can you imagine that? Oh, sure, yeah, just to mention his ontological position. He's Narada Muni. But Narada Muni, generally you think of him as a brahmachari. He doesn't really get married. But he got married. And he had a mother-in-law, obviously. You have to be married to have a mother-in-law. So he, anyway, just had her kicked out for that reason. Another time, he let someone in. You know, sometimes he's a little sentimental, soft-hearted. He let someone in who was a Brahmin who was living just by drinking milk. He thought he must be pure. And Lord Chaitanya had a similar response. Of course, at that particular time, the Brahmin apologized, and Lord Chaitanya let him stay in. So there was different stories like that. And then so many stories about Srivasa that I remember. And another story was that he was so devoted to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that during one of these kirtan performances or exhibitions or manifestations, Srivasa Thakura's son passed away. Wow. And his wife, Malini, started to cry. And he saw that she was crying, so he took her into a different room and said, why are you crying? What's happening? And she said, your son died. And he said, we're not going to disturb Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's kirtan. So you better, I mean, there's two different versions of the story. One story is, he said, I'll give you something really to cry about. Yeah. Another version of the story, which we heard this morning from the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, was that he said, if you disturb, I'll jump in the Ganges River and drown myself. So in any case, there was a threat. Don't disturb the kirtan, and don't cry. And you know, that's very difficult in circumstances like that. Also reminds me of the Ramayana. When Lakshman left with Lord Ram, he said to Urmila, his wife, you're not allowed to cry for 14 years. Now that's a hard order to follow. Impossible. So anyways, she did it. So anyway, so the kirtan continued, but Lord Chaitanya sensed it again, something had happened. Kirtan finished and Lord Chaitanya said it wasn't ecstatic like normal, so something happened. And Srivasa Thakura said something is inconsequential. And Lord Chaitanya said, you know what? And Srivasa Thakura said, my son passed away. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, why didn't you stop the Kirtan? Why didn't you tell me? And Srivasa Thakura said, I didn't want to disturb your ecstasy. And Lord Chaitanya said, where is the body? So they rushed him to the next room, and the child was laying there. And then Lord Chaitanya said, whatever the son's name was, why did you leave? He touched the son on the head. The son gets up, comes back to life. And he said, many, many lives have I passed in this material world. But somehow or other, during this lifetime, I've heard the kirtan. And therefore, I was ready to go back to Godhead. So, let me go.
Yeah.
Let me go. So, actually, that also is reflected in a story from the Ramayana. So, which I'm not going to tell the story, but it's very similar. That the original Janaka. Oh, I'll tell the story. Okay. Yeah, the little story. So this is the reason why Matila is called Matila, because Matila means to churn. So there was once upon a time this king. Sorry if I'm not just talking about Srivasa Thakura, but I associate with things and I jump. So anyway, there's this king. His name was Nimi. And his guru got very upset. His guru happened to be Vashishta Muni. Guru got upset because he had to sacrifice without his guru's permission. He didn't wait for his guru to come back from the heavenly planets when the guru was getting some nice dakshin. So, that's the story. So he thought, why should I wait for a sacrifice for Guru Maharaj? Chanting Hare Krishna can be done. Yamena Tishtam, It's basically a Vaishnava sacrifice. So he starts the sacrifice, the Guru Maharaj comes back, and the Guru Maharaj says, why'd you do this without me? And he said, human life is very short, And so Guru Maharaj said, well, it's even shorter. I curse you to be near Deha, which means without your body. So Nimi dies. And as he's dying, he says, Guru Maharaj, you should also be without a body. So Guru Maharaj dies. Guru Maharaj later appeared from the Srimad, that's a whole other story. And Nimi, the sacrifice is still going on. So the sages, they preserve his body in oil. So at the end of the sacrifice, the demigods come, and the demigods say, would you like a benediction? And the sages say, yes, we want Nimi to come back to life, because basically there's nobody to be the king. And so, let me turn this off. Somehow or other they'd like to bother you all day long. So many nice souls. So anyway, so there's nobody to be the king, so you got to bring him back to life. So the demigods say, okay. Nimi sits up out of the oil, and he says, I don't want to be back to life. I want to be back to Godhead. So, goodbye. So what they do is they churn his body. Somehow there's this sort of genetic engineering, cloning or something like that. They churn his body, and he has a son. And his first son is known as Janaka. Janaka the first. And then there's a Janaka the second, Janaka the third, fourth, fifth, whatever. And finally, Sita's father, Janaka Maharaj. Nice, isn't it? So anyway, Srivasa Thakura's son said, I don't want to come back to life. I died during Lord Chaitanya's kirtan. what's a better way to die than to die during Lord Chaitanya's kirtan, right? Wow. You're definitely back to Godhead at that point. And so, God collapses, it goes back to the spiritual world. And then Lord Chaitanya is so pleased with Srivasa Thakura at that particular point that he says, from this day forward, I am your son and Lord Nityananda is your son. And literally that happened. Lord Nityananda used to even sit on the lap of Srivasa Thakura's wife, and she would feed him. And remember, Lord Nityananda, he's older than Lord Chaitanya. He's about the same age as Srivasa Thakura, or maybe a little more. But, oh my God, don't try that at home. So, and then they accepted like that, and they served Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. Lord Chaitanya had other tests that he gave Srivasa Thakura. Another test that comes to mind is that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to test Srivasa Thakura's devotion to Lord Nityananda. Because as you know, Lord Nityananda is quite an avadhuta. He was supposed to be renounced in a renounced order at that particular point, because later on, I mean, he didn't take the formal order of renunciation. He didn't take sannyas. I mean, but basically, he was known as basically a sannyasi. But even though he didn't take sannyas, renounced or I guess brahmacharya, whatever. And so, he was quite unusual. I mean, sometimes he would be in so much ecstasy, he'd throw his clothes off. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had to put his own wrapper around Lord Nityananda. And things like that. I mean, because he was always immersed in ecstasy. The greatest ecstasy. Like, there's different types of bhavas or emotions, samshari bhava. And when they do those things, of course, devotees don't do those things nowadays. Shouldn't do those things, because that will encourage people to be sahajas. So Lord Nityananda, he was like that, very unusual. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said to Srivasa Thakura, why is it that you're allowing this Lord Nityananda in your house? Nobody knows his background, nobody knows his caste. He actually was a Brahmin by caste. Yes, that is correct. But Lord Chaitanya was saying that. Nobody knows, and he's so unusual. Don't you think it's going to really hurt your reputation? And Srivasa Thakura showed his great devotion to Lord Nityananda by saying, even if Lord Nityananda marries a Muslim girl, you have to imagine that, or he goes into a liquor shop, I will not be dissuaded from my conviction he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Wow, such devotion like that. Faith. Shadashabde Vishashabde. Sutrita Nishya. So that was another test of Srivasa Thakura's devotion, is that Lord Chaitanya, he never worked a job. Because he didn't have to get a visa. But so I'm not suggesting this. If you're a pure devotee, yeah. But raise your hand if you're pure devotee. Then Krishna takes care of that point. Just like Prabhupada came to the Western world with 40 rupees, which you never got a chance to change, and everything was successful. 11 years, 108 temples, whatever. So if you're a pure devotee, you can do that. You can just go out into the world with nothing, and ananyas chintayanta mam yejanat parivaste kishanajayutamam yoga shema ahamyam. So Srivasa Thakura was a pure devotee, but he also had a family, and a large family too. Not a lot of children, but brother-in-law, everything like Srivasa Srinidhi. He had 2 other brothers, who were also pure devotees of the Lord. And so Lord Chaitanya said, you know, how are you maintaining all these people? And Srivasa Thakur clapped his hands and said, I have a 1, 2, 3 technique. And Lord Chaitanya said, what does that mean? He said, you know, if I have to fast for 3 days, I'll drown myself in the Ganges. You know, threatening the Lord. You know, that's an explicit threat that I'll kill myself unless you provide me.
Wow.
So, what happened is that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, even if the goddess of fortune has to go begging, you will never be reft of anything. You will always be maintained. So this was the intimate relationship, and between other things happened too, like Srivasa Thakur one time was called upon to sort of diagnose Lord Chaitanya was acting like in extreme ecstasy, and everyone thought, well, it was a wind disorder. You know, that's how Ayurvedic doctors diagnose, you know, mental problems, wind disorder. And so Srivasa Thakur explained to Lord Chaitanya's mother, Sakshi Mata, this is actually pure love of God. So anyone who served Srivasa Thakur got the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. There was a tailor who was a meat eater who became a pure devotee because he was serving Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Whereas there were others who offended Srivasa Thakur and basically they lost everything. Once upon a time, we talked about how non-devotees or envious people were not allowed into the kirtan. So there was this one Brahmin, he was a Brahmin. He wasn't allowed into the kirtan, and he got very upset with Srivasa Thakur. His name was Gopal Chapala, nice spiritual name. And he thought, I'm going to frame Srivasa Thakur. Framing someone means make it seem like they've done something bad. So what he did is he put the ingredients for worshiping the demigods, especially Durga, outside of Srivasa Thakur's house, like vermilion and wine and other things. You know, he planted them. Sometimes even in certain countries, it's even heard it happen in the Western world, when they want to arrest someone, they plant drugs in their car. You know, it's called framing. Everyone's heard that expression before? Yeah. Framing someone. So he wanted to destroy Srivasa Thakur's reputation. Okay. So he does all that. And Srivasa Thakur, being very humble, opens his door the next day and says, well, now everybody can see me, I'm worshiping the demigods. And nobody took it seriously, because they understood who Srivasa Thakur was. But this Gopal Chapala, he developed leprosy. And he went to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and I think everyone knows what leprosy is, where your fingers melt, your nose melts. He went to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he said to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you're the most beneficent, like what Rupa Goswami prays in the Mahavadvinaya Krishna Sampradayati. So help me. And Lord Chaitanya says, I curse you to be bitten by these same worms for millions of births, because you've offended Srivasa Thakur. So important lessons for us. You may think, you know, nobody's like Srivasa Thakur. Well, we're dealing with Vaishnavas. So we offend the Vaishnava, where everything is lost. And if we serve a Vaishnava and please a Vaishnava, then we can achieve perfection. So then he was bereft, and finally he was able to get apologize to Srivasa Thakur some years later, and he got forgiven by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then the leprosy went away. And that also happened with a Bhagavatam reciter, Devananda Pandit. Devananda Pandit was giving Bhagavatam class, and Srivasa Thakur went into that class to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam, and we know when you have a pure devotee and he hears the Krishna Katha, Mahaprabhu, Kirtana, Richagita, Varituladyan, Madhusova Sena. He feels ecstasy. And so he exhibited symptoms of ecstasy, and what happened is Srivasa Thakur was offended because under the supervision of Devananda Pandit, they took Srivasa Thakur and threw him out. And then Devananda Pandit lost his ability to understand Srimad Bhagavatam. So even later when Lord Chaitanya was walking by the class that he was giving, remember class was given in the open at that particular juncture, Lord Chaitanya said, you will never understand Srimad Bhagavatam because you offended Srivasa Thakur. Later on, he served another Vaishnava, Rakeshwar Pandit, by protecting him during the kirtan. And then he was able to apologize to Srivasa Thakur because of Vaishnava mercy. This is very important. So a very important lesson we learned from his interactions with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates is Vaishnava Seva. There's, of course, Jivadaya, Namaruchi, which are the three basic messages of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's advent as far as the external reason that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared. But we see this in his interactions, loving interactions. Also we see Dati Pratagranati Guyam Akyati Prichati Ute Bojite Chaiva, loving exchanges between Vaishnavas. If we study the history of great devotees like Srivasa Thakur, who I mentioned before is Narada Muni. So anyway, so a little, just to end, I'll just end with the ontology of the Panchatattva. So, because I began talking about how the Lord appears with his all his associates. So Panchatattva is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Krishna, the mood of Radharani, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Radha Krishna Narayana, Lord Nityananda, Balaram Hoylantai, who is Balaram, the original guru. And then we have, of course, we have Advaita Acharya, who is Mahavishnu, Sadashiva. And then we have Gadadhar Pandit Goswami, who is Srimati Radharani, and Bachelor Srimati Radharani. And then we have Srivasa Thakur, who is Narada Muni. So all of them together are Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's weapons. Sangho Pandastra Parshada Yadyayi. And what do they teach? Yadyayi Sankirtana Prayar Shanti Samedusa. So in order to achieve perfection in this Yuga Dharma, which is Shanti Samedusa, Vaishnava Seva is very important, and this is the message of Srivasa Thakur's pastimes, Vaishnava Seva. And then you get Namaruchi. And then you also are able to be doya, or compassionate towards others. So, Srivasa Thakur ki jai. So, any questions? Yeah.
So, from the pastime of Gopal, I just want to understand, was it Mahaprabhu's Leela in a way for sadhaka in the future or at that time to understand the consequences of making a mistake?
Yeah.
But my other thing I want to understand as well, in my understanding, Mahaprabhu is the most merciful incarnation. Right. So is it like he is eternally doomed, or is just Leela for us to understand? Like what is the...
He got forgiven. He got forgiven. But sometimes there's something called tough love. I mean, sometimes people question. Like Prabhupada sometimes is very heavy. Prabhupada generally never rejected a disciple. There's only one case. There was one disciple who was offensive. And this disciple asked Prabhupada for instruction. And Prabhupada said, he said to Prabhupada, you're my spiritual master. Prabhupada said, you don't have a spiritual master. But that's for a lesson, you know. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very heavy with them, you know, was as strong as a thunderbolt and soft as a rose. So, but both are manifestations of compassion. You know, Prabhupada would chastise, devotees would be in ecstasy with Prabhupada chastised. Like that. So, we have to understand it's all compassion. Even Krishna's killing the demons, of course, Krishna liberates people when he kills the demons. But it's compassion. And ultimately, or the great sages cursing people. It's compassion. Just like we read about all these demons during Krishna's pastimes. And generally, I think most of them are cursed by some sage somewhere because they offended the sage, they laughed at the sage because he looked ugly or something like that. And then they became an ugly serpent, like a Gasura. So, or Nardamuni person, Manigriva Nalakuvara. It was all done out of compassion and love. You have to understand, the pure devotee and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are not doing things because they feel offended. You know, we may curse someone because our feelings are hurt.
Huh.
Right? You get angry with someone. We don't necessarily curse. I've only cursed one person my whole life. It was actually in Venezuela. He was threatening to destroy the movement.
Oh.
It wasn't about me personally. It was about the movement. And he died shortly there. So be careful dealing with me. So, no, it's a joke. It's a joke. But it's a true story. But generally, you know, when we get angry with someone, it's about us. We're not really concerned with them. So, Lord Chaitanya's anger and Srila Prabhupada's anger and pure devotees' anger and the sages' anger and pure devotees is all because, you know, we've got to do something to help this person. So Manigriva Nalakuvara, you know, they're just parading themselves in front of the Narada Muni completely naked. Because in one sense, Prabhupada's pretty merciful because Prabhupada went into nudist colonies and preached to people. And so one of the persons in the nudist colony became a great devotee in the Krishna consciousness movement. I'm not going to mention names, but he became one of our main leaders in the Krishna consciousness movement. Yeah. He was living in a tree in the nudist colony. Anyway, so Prabhupada, can you imagine how merciful that is?
Yeah.
I mean, I tried. One time the devotees asked me to go, Gopal will remember this, asked me to go to this festival. Yeah. He remembers it. Where everybody was naked. Not everybody, not the devotees. But everybody else, you got to sit in front of someone and teach them how to chant japa, or they're just sitting there with no clothes on. And it was cold because when you're smoking marijuana, they don't experience the cold. So I had to go there and preach. I think I lasted 1 day or something like that. I said, take me out of here. I'm not so compassionate. But Prabhupada was so compassionate like that. And then he went to the Bowery and different places like that. Places that my mother would never let me go to when I was young. I said to my mother, I'm going to go to the Bowery today in New York. She said, no, you're not leaving this house. That's where drunk people and all sorts of crazy people were. You see, Prabhupada had to step over people, basically, or the drunks moved aside for Prabhupada to go into his room. They stole things from Prabhupada. Prabhupada's been merciful. But anyway, Narada Muni, he cursed Manigriva Nalakuvara out of love. You know, of course, I'm not saying that I would want to stand for a tree, as a tree for so many years. I said, let me just chant Hare Krishna. Forget about this tree business. But it was out of love and compassion. It wasn't out of animosity. So we have to be careful when we hear about pure devotees or great sages, not to project our own mentality. Or we hear, again, about Krishna's pastimes. We have to be really careful and understand what is our adhikar, what is our right to hear about these things. And don't criticize the sages when they do these things, or Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when he curses someone like that. It's out of love. Lord Chaitanya is always loving everybody. So I think we have time for the sacrifice because the auspicious hour is coming. I remember there was one GBC meeting we had. We weren't allowed to enter the GBC room until the auspicious moment. It was actually Ravindra Swarup who was in charge at that time. We had to stand outside. You're not allowed to come in. Okay, at 11:05, everyone has to run in real quickly.
How was the outcome?
It wasn't the best meeting I have to say, it didn't make a difference. Because when you're engaged in spiritual activities, everything's auspicious. Like, especially the chanting the holy name or serving Krishna, chanting Niyamena Tishtan. I mean, we chant when there's an eclipse. Isn't it? Vachitani Mahaprabhu, we're in an eclipse. So, for Vaishnava, I mean, of course, externally, because we're preaching, we have to consider certain things, because otherwise people will think we're a bunch of malachas. If we start doing everything during an eclipse, people will not respect our movement. But practically speaking, spiritual activities are always auspicious, regardless of time, places. There's no harm, especially the chanting the holy name. You do that wherever you are, Kirtaniya, Sabahari. Okay, I think that's enough. Thank you very much. Srivasa, Thakura, Vijay, Srila Prabhupada, Vijay.